Hey everyone, this is the Mind Workshop podcast where we get experts and we get people that are happy and get their perspective on what it takes to really be happy these days. Today we have Khalil on, and I'm really excited. We met at SellerCon, and he just seemed like he had a lot of things to talk about. He seems like you're a really happy guy, especially a kind guy. And I'm really excited to talk to him today. He's going to go through a little bit about an intro of who he is and how he got to the point where he's at. And then we'll kind of like dive into the conversation. Khalil, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you, Victor, for having me. I really am so happy to be here. And so a little bit about me is my name is Khalil. I'm 25 years old, and I'm actually from Central California. I've been here for like the majority of all my life, and I studied biology, and I have an emphasis in microbiology and immunology. I'm really passionate about health and wellness and just positivity in general. And yeah, and I'm really also interested into philanthropy. So anything about giving back and helping others is a huge part of who I am.
Wow, that's amazing. And I love to go into a little bit about why helping others is like so important. Normally, you would think it doesn't matter as much, but I watched a Simon Sinek thing where he talked about how fulfillment doesn't come from accomplishment. It comes from helping others. And that's kind of how our brain is kind of like designed in a way. From when we help others, our brain gives us like good signals, fulfillment signals, for helping others. And that's kind of how we've been designed. So it's really nice to have that piece of it to where that fulfillment does come from helping others. And it really does make you feel better about yourself as well. And that, because that's how our brains are kind of designed in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I feel like when you put yourself into um, a position where you give and help people, you get so much more in return. And in some way, it's kind of people say it's selfless, but it's a little selfish because you feel so good afterwards and you just feel like you've contributed something and you help someone. And anything that you do, any act of kindness, as simple as like a smile, can really like change a life. And I've experienced it myself, as cliche and corny people may think it sounds, like literally a smile could change a life. So yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
agree.
totally agree. And I think what people have to do first is kind of like go through this like self-awareness journey to understand who they are, which in turn eventually like creates happiness inside the person as they become more aware. And then once they become happy themselves, then they can eventually figure out how to help other people is kind of how I understand it. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts? Like, do you think there's a different path, the same path? What do you kind of think about it?
Same wavelength I'm thinking as you is. And I listened to Oprah so many times. I've been listening to her motivational speeches. So she says something like, people said that she's so full of herself, and a lot of time people be like that's like a negative like it's a negative connotation to say that to someone, but she took it as a compliment, and I was like, that's really interesting because she said when you're full of yourself, you're able to give so much more to people. When your cup runneth over, you're able to fill other people's cups. But when you're like depleted and you're like sub negative zero and you have nothing to give because you yourself are negative, like in a negative balance state, you can't give to people and you can't contribute in a bigger way. So it's
Yeah.
important to allow yourself to go through the door and help yourself so that you can help others along the way.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's also important to have like that balance, in my opinion, of helping people to truly help them. Because some people will have insecurities and be a people pleaser, basically, where it's like they do it because they're hurting on the inside and they feel like they always have to help others to make them feel better. But it's important to have that balance of saying, hey, like it's kind of weird saying like, "Hey, I don't care about your opinion," but at the same time saying, "Hey, I want to help you." So it's kind of like a weird mesh of saying you can't care too much about other people's opinion, and you have to also love the person as well. And it's a balance of saying, "Hey, I don't care about your opinion about me. It doesn't affect me of who I am. I'll listen, but it doesn't affect me who I am. But I still want to help you." So it's kind of like this weird dynamic of you can't rely on that as yourself. So you have to first be happy and comfortable with who you are as a person. and then you can go and try to help other people. But if you're not comfortable with who you are and you're just a people pleaser, you're going to be in a constant state of like always sacrificing yourself over others, which sounds nice, but you're going to do it at your own detriment. So like you're like no matter you're never going to have your own opinion basically where
Yeah.
you're always going to be helping others and you're never going to be looking at yourself. So kind of to your point about being selfish to be selfish to be se- to be selfish to be
Yeah.
selfless, going to that point, yes, at some level you have to help yourself and to be
Mhm.
comfortable in a good space first, then you could help others in my opinion. What are your thoughts?
I love that, and I agree with that. It's very similar to also the animal kingdom, where um, my my biologist professor would be so disappointed because I completely forgot the terminology for this. But it's basically where an organism essentially uses another organism for mutual benefit. So they will like for whales, there's certain animals that will like take like help the whales because the whale can't like scratch its back and do whatever, but there's certain animals that will go and latch onto the whale and join onto the whale's ride and benefit off of that. And while the whale also benefits of getting cleaned and it has it's but humans in general as well, you have to have a boundary and everything. There's homeostasis. So if you go overboard, in biology, everything in life in general, everything has to be a balance. So if you go too much, it's not good. If you go too little, it's not good either. Everything has to be in a center in the middle, and there has to be a balance between like everything. So yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like it's just really important to not like rationalize all these different pieces of us, especially when it comes down to like, oh, like for example, like someone that says, oh, I just like really giving back to the community, but really asking like, okay, like why? Is it because you're are you trying to feel like are you trying to get external validation, and that external you're relying on that in order to accomplish it? So like it's great that you do give back. I'm not saying you should change that, but it's more of like asking why. Are you looking for that external validation? Are you doing it because of the feeling? Are you doing it for like for all these other things? So it's just really important to like not be that people pleaser and have that balance of you're giving back because you really want to, for because your happiness is so big, basically.
Yeah, I agree. You have to have your intentions in line and what is your like what are you trying to accomplish with helping someone? And usually it has to be in a point where you have to be able to do it in a selfless way for the greater good, not for something like I'm doing it just to feel good about myself. So I can brag to my friends like, "Hey, I helped this person." You
Yeah,
know? So,
yeah, it's totally
absolutely.
true. And when it comes down to like diving in a little bit about the stages of like, hey, self awareness, then like that becomes happiness, and then eventually start helping others. Um, what would you say is your key to in yourself? How you've been able to really get through this stage of self discovery, where you've been able to find more about yourself? How have you kind of dove into your own psyche to understand more about yourself?
Yeah. That's a very good question. I'm the youngest in my family, so I got to, think about this very early on. When I was very little, just a little background story of you guys. I failed elementary school, like every grade in elementary school, and I spoke until I was the age of 5. And if it wasn't for my mother, I would have been many grades behind. And from that day on, from being very young, I learned and I got very familiar with failure. And so when you are kind of face to face with failure at a very early on age, you kind of realize like, what do I need to do to get to a specific point in my life? And so my parents, because they were immigrants, they were from Afghanistan, and so they had high expectations of you either be a doctor or engineer. But despite that expectation, my mother never made me feel like I was inadequate or I wasn't good enough. And so growing up from failing every grade in elementary school to trying to make it in elementary school, and then in high school something clicked and I started getting all A's in my classes, and I passed all, then going up to college, getting a degree in biology. And during that stage in life of growth, I figured out who I was. And thanks to a teacher in 7th grade, her name was Mrs. Reiko. She's not watching this, but she might. But she asked me, like, Khalil, who are you? And I was like, I'm Khalil Husseini, and like, this is who I am. And she's like, no, who are you really? And I was like, what does she mean? Like, I'm Afghan, I'm American. But she's like, no, you don't know. One day you will know who you are. And she's like, but until then, come back to me. And you don't know your answer. You don't know the answer now. And I was like, okay, whatever. Like, she didn't know what she's talking about. It was seventh grade me. So after growing up, that burning question really was in the back of my mind, like, who am I? Like, why am I here? One, and who am I? And when you find who you are, you're able to really discover, really, like, your roots and understand, like, even your purpose as well. And once you get to understand all that, that ties in with you finding inner happiness. Because, and I'm not speaking on behalf of a lot of people, but seeing my own family, a lot of people, they don't know really who they are, and they're hiding, they're living in a mask. They're living in a false reality in their own mind, and they're not so comfortable with themselves that they they essentially kind of live in this fake identity, and that is not the definition of inner happiness. And so with me, I had to really know that I'm Afghan and I'm American, and I'm also Muslim, and I have my beliefs as my core beliefs of, like, humanity, being kind to people, helping people, knowing my passions, and what is my purpose in the world, and just giving back. And my parents, they raised me in a way, like, again, going back to philanthropy, giving back to people. Again, your intentions has to be in line. You can't just do it for show, and you can't do it to just make yourself feel better, but you really have to do it from a place of heart. And so all of this, when you tie it all together, it really ultimately leads to a greater degree of happiness. And that's how I figured out who I am, what is my place in this world, and how can I obtain happiness. And I'm so sorry, that's like a jumble of everything.
No, I
Trying to tie
love
it
that.
in.
I love that. There's so many pieces in that. So the first thing, I think it's amazing that your mom didn't say that you were a failure or anything else, because we get we grow up in a society where, for example, if we came home and we didn't get good grades under a normal circumstance, it would be like our parents would get angry at us and say, "Hey, this is bad." And if we came home with good grades, our parents would say, "Hey, this is amazing, great job." And so in our brains as children, we say, "Oh, our love is dependent on our grades that we get." And this kind of like mentality goes up through adulthood, and saying like, "Hey, if I don't have a lot of money, I won't, no one will love me." Or, and it's like kind of like very, we think it's very binary. It's like, oh, once I get this nice car, then someone will love me. And then like it's like we're always thinking and making that never ending chase, and it makes it where you become what society says rather than what your own goals are. And it makes it where you're chasing money, status, all these other things, and those things will never lead to happiness. They always lead to this never-ending chase of I got to have more, I got to have more. And that's why I always say that like it's so important to find out how you can be comfortable and happy with where you are right now, um, because if you're always looking to the future, you're never going to be happy saying, "Oh, once I accomplish this, then I'll be happy." What you're doing is you're giving criteria for happiness and joy. You're saying,
Mhm.
"Oh, once I give this, then I'll be happy." But usually that criteria that we set literally makes no sense at all most of
Yeah,
the time, where it's
yeah,
like, "Oh, once I have a nice car, then I'll be happy." It's like, okay, where like show me where that makes sense in some
yeah,
way. Like it usually it makes no sense in any way, and usually has something to do with insecurities most of the time.
yeah,
And that's where one like the self-awareness is so important, to understand that, saying like, hey, like just because I have more money, or just because I have more a nice car or a nice house, that doesn't make it where I'm going to be happy. And you have to understand that in yourself, and you realizing that most of those things are just for external validation to make you feel better about yourself. But in reality, like if you're always looking for external validation, you're always going to be disappointed. There's always going to be people that hate you. There's always going to be people that, like, no matter where you are in life, there's always going to be some type of level of um people hating on you, and you're always going to find a problem with your life. So it's really important to figure out that part in yourself and create the goals that are true to you rather than what society says.
Absolutely. I agree. I feel like that's what a lot of us we are into this whole societal expectation of again, my parents are like, you're either a doctor or engineer. And later on they realized that they had to drop that label and be like, okay, you can be whatever you want. And
Yeah.
they started supporting that. And with my mom, she, despite my failures as a little kid, and she was an immigrant. She didn't know English that well, but yet she was still adamant on making sure I pass every class along with my peers. And she was also a teacher in Afghanistan, and my grandfather was a medical doctor, so she was able to like she had that confidence and courage to like still like represent even though that she didn't know the English that well.
Mhm.
And also going back to what you stated is that inner chasing of like that worldly chase of like wanting to get the next best thing, or once I have $1 million and I'll be happy. But really, happiness is literally available to you right now. Like it's funny because my family and my nieces and nephews, they live in Texas as well, and we always joke. There's this YouTube video of this guy laughing. He's from India. He's called a laughing doctor or something, and he would
Uh-huh.
just hysterically laugh like randomly, and we will laugh along with him. And we're like, "What is this crazy guy on YouTube doing?" And he will just laugh for like 2 minutes straight, and he literally said, "I'm happy and I'm relaxed." And literally, we would do the same thing. We're like, okay, let's see if it works. And we literally felt so much better and happier. And there's this scientific thing that happens in your brain where your brain doesn't know the difference between if you're laughing for real or you're fake laughing. And you literally will release serotonin and those good feeling hormones. And you're like, wow, I feel so much better. And another thing that I can like for the audience as well, for anyone who's listening, if you practice gratitude every day, I have a grateful journal that I write every day, every night. And I didn't believe this. I was like, I'm not gonna. What can writing 3 year things about I'm grateful in my day would really change, would be that of a huge difference in one's life. And after doing it for a whole week, I realized that at the end of the day, I was looking forward to write something that I was grateful to. Like if someone opened a door, I'd be like, I'm going to write that on my grateful journal tonight. And so once you look back on all those pages that you wrote that you're grateful for, and if you ever are in a negative mindset, you're like, wow, that happened good to me, or that was something super nice that someone did. And when you really practice gratitude, you really have everything. But when you're in a mindset of always wanting to just, I want to have, I have, like you keep chasing, you're never going to get it. And you're not going to feel happy. And the last thing I can say regarding this point is if you look at people who are super wealthy and rich, and I know Ariana Grande, she said something funny in her line. She was like, her receipts be looking like phone numbers, and if someone didn't know that you can buy happiness, she said something funny along the lines that they must have not had enough money, but you can buy happiness. But really, if you look at a lot of the wealthy rich people, they don't look that happy, and you have to find happiness within yourself, and it's attainable. You just have to look within. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And luckily we've probably at the conferences that we go to, we've met a lot of like people like millionaires, and we see that like they're just normal people. Like sometimes they're miserable. There's a lot of miserable millionaires out there, and a lot of people think of like on social media like, oh, all millionaires, they have all these houses, all these things, and they only like they're always happy. It's like no, that's not how
Yeah.
that works. Is they're like normal people. They go through like normal stuff, and they hate life just as much as everyone else. And that's where you really got to take a step back. And I think when we talk about self awareness, I think the best way to kind of get started for the audience when it comes down to self awareness is literally just to write down your thoughts. Either that or like just go in a room with nothing and just like look at the ceiling and just analyze your thoughts. And if you really want to get even deeper, I do video. I do video dialogue. So I literally just grab my phone and I just like
Smart.
talk. So like you know how like when you have if there's a piece of cake in front of you, you know how there's usually two different characters talking where it's like one side of your brain will say eat the cake, eat the cake, eat the
Yeah.
cake, and the other side of your brain will say you don't need the calories, do not eat the
Yeah.
cake. So there's like
Yeah.
two kind of conflicting voices, and you can
Mhm.
basically have a conversation with that in your head and be able to just be aware with what's going on, and you become a lot more emotionally intelligent because of it. So like, for example, like for some reason I might be upset, or like I'll literally like I say like, hey, I don't know what emotion I'm feeling right now, and I'll just like be talking to myself and say I'm feeling upset, I'm feeling angry, and I don't know why. And you can really figure out like the dial down of what is the main cause is, because there's a lot that's going on in our brain that we're not aware of. There's a lot of internal conversations. You know how like that one cake conversation? There's a lot of other conversations going on that we have no idea what's happening. So
Yeah.
if like, you have a random thought or a random emotion, you know that that's coming from a different, like when something random pops up in my head, like a random memory or a random emotion just randomly pops up, I'm like, okay, where in my brain did I have that conversation? And I got to figure out where this came from, because I don't know what's going on here. And so it makes it where you're a lot more in tune with kind of what's going on, because there's so many, there's like, I talk about this, there's no true self, in my opinion, the way I understand my brain at least. There is being authentic with yourself, but our brain is always going to adapt with the environment around it, meaning that our identity is always going to be changing. Victor right now is going to be a lot different than Victor at a conference. Like I'm going to be like two different people, like me around me right now versus me with my family, two different Victors. Me by myself is a completely different person. Our identity is always changing, and there isn't like this necessarily true identity. Like even if you say you lock yourself in a room, people say that that's their true identity. But if the room is black versus the room is white, you're going to be two completely different people. For me, if I'm in a dark room, I'm going to be very sad. I'm going to feel isolated. But if I'm in a white room, I'm going to feel a little bit happier. I'm going to feel more vibrant. But like no matter where you are, your brain is going to respond with the environment around you. It's just about realizing it. It's about realizing that you're going to be these different people based off what you're around. What are your thoughts on that?
I actually I see what you're talking about. With the funny thing is, I always think of the science aspect of it. So,
Mhm.
when I was in neurobiology, there was a course I took, and it was the craziest class ever. I can take immunology, virology, microbiology, all those ologies, but when it comes to neurology, I'm sorry, I can't. Even cardiology, I can't do it. So, your brain is so freaking crazy. Like the nervous system in general. What's going on synergistically as I'm talking to you at the same time? I'm having my own thoughts while I'm speaking, completely different things. My hands are moving, your body is regulating all these hormones, like all these things all at once. Your heart rate, your
Mhm.
breathing, your digestive system, and it's like it's so like, oh yeah, that's like the body doing its thing, and it's not as miraculous as it really should be because
Yep.
it's crazy. And so the brain, we only know certain percentages of what is really going on. Even the neural circuits, like the neural circuits that are going on. I'm like looking at the camera right now, but actually, according to like neurology, we have so many visual things going on with the colors, and your cells and your eyes are trying to perceive what type of wavelengths, and you see things upside down, but your brain flips it in this position that we're currently seeing it as, and your left is for your right side of your brain, and your right side of your brain works for your left side of your body. So everything is so complex, and the more you think about it, the more your brain goes crazy itself. You're like, I can't even
Yeah.
understand my own brain. So with personalities, I also heard of this too. Like the voice you hear in the back of your brain. There was something really that clicked with me. I was watching on TikTok where, you know, that the critic of that
Yeah.
voice in your brain.
Yeah.
That usually has to do with childhood trauma. So if anyone in your family or friends that were mean to you, usually it's that voice that is speaking now back to you as an adult in that form of identity as that person. And you haven't really recognized it because you thought that is your identity. But really, that's not your brain's voice. That's someone else that was like, it was literally AI, artificial intelligence that your brain got is speaking on behalf of that person. If you were going crazy about ChatGPT, but your brain's been way ahead of that. And
Uh-huh.
so even dreams, we don't know why we sleep. The craziest thing is like, why do we sleep? Oh, because we just as humans need to. But why? Why do we need? And they don't even know why. We don't even understand why we dream. Like how crazy, like I'm sure everyone has had some crazy dream once in your life at least, where you're like one day at McDonald's parking lot and the next you're flying in the sky with like helicopters. And you're like, what? And you're like in some other country. And the brain is crazy. And so I
Mhm.
totally agree with
And
identity.
Yeah, and our brain will build out the identities in these kind of characters. Like if, either if it's the inner critic or any of these other things, our brain will build that, and whatever content or people you listen to strengthens that particular character. So if you have a really strong inner critic inside of you, it's either that voice keeps getting repeated inside of you, or at some level your brain as a child said this is important. So for example, when I was 15, my inner critic was extremely strong. So I worked like 14 hours a day, because if I worked, even like if I went to go, for example, play with my friends for 30 minutes, my inner critic would say, oh, how could you do that? You got to be working toward your future. Why aren't you working? You got to be doing this. Like, why aren't you doing these things? And that inner critic inside of me was extremely strong, and it was like kind of like killing me to be honest. And when I turned 18, I really realized that, like, hey, like my future self is going to regret working so much, so I should just live in the present right now. And that's when I started thinking about the opposite side, kind of that more, rather than the inner critic, um, more of like that inner mentor type of personality, where it's like, hey, let's heal, let's figure this out. And it's a more positive interaction than the inner critic, which is saying like, you suck, you got to be doing this, you got to be working on this. And it's more of like the inner mentor interaction. And the reason why I bring these two people up is because you give the power of which character you choose. So if you want to build out like more of the inner mentor and more of healing phrases, you it starts by the people you interact with and the content you consume. So you control that. So it's not like, oh, like this inner critic's inside of me, I have no control of it. No, you have a lot of control over it. You just don't understand the tools yet. So if you start listening to more YouTube videos or more podcasts about promoting happiness and getting that, you're strengthening those voices, those thoughts inside your head. So now those thoughts are a little bit stronger than they were before. And it takes a little bit longer to fix that mindset. But for whatever voice you have right now, you can just figure out the counter of that. Like, for example, I used to always think I was fat. No matter how skinny I got, I used to always work out. No matter how skinny I got, I always thought I was fat. And then I asked why, like, hey, what's going on? And it's because I wasn't comfortable with who I am. And eventually I started telling myself, hey, I am enough. I do love myself, and all these other phrases. And that was the voices I needed to strengthen inside my head to then not always work out, to always feel like I was fat. So there's going to be certain things inside of your head that you'll be able to strengthen to counter all these inner insecurities that we have, because we all have insecurities. It's not a fact if you have insecurity. You do have an insecurity. If you don't think you do, you do. It's just under there. So it's just really interesting. What are your thoughts on that?
That you hit it on a nail. So I've literally I came across this thing again on TikTok. I try to limit social media, but sometimes I only consume good content. And there's this amazing lady. She said that you have to re-raise yourself. And a lot of times as adults, we are like, oh, I've been raised like this. This is what my belief. Sometimes you have to literally sit with yourself, rewire your brain, and teach yourself, like be nice to yourself. A lot of times we're so nice to other people and we give other people compliments, but really if the audience can ask themselves, like, when was the last time that you complimented yourself? When was the last time that you said something nice about yourself in the mirror? We never do that. As society, we are like, oh, like, girl, you look good today, or hey, like, you're killing it, like, nice, like you look good with your clothes. But like we don't say anything with ourselves. We're just like, oh, I'm chubby, or I'm
Yep.
not too like I don't look too muscular, or I'm not that good. I'm not that smart. And it's horrible because you psychologically basically prove to yourself in your mind that, yeah, I am not good. Yeah, I am chubby. Yeah, I am not worth it. Yeah, I have issues, and you're giving yourself that excuse. But the moment you tell yourself, like, I am handsome, or I am smart, I am capable, I am competent, your brain cannot differentiate a compliment from you or a stranger. Your brain's like, oh, thank you. All right, Roger's that. I like register it in my brain circuit. And
Yep.
so we as humans, we have to be nice to ourselves. And it goes back to filling your cup until your cup runs over so that you can do it for others. But again, like a lot of times people, when they think of like helping people, they think of something like money, or they think of like worldly possessions. But really, again, it goes back to a simple smile, or it goes back to a simple gesture, like a compliment. That is essentially helping people in a very nice, positive way. And so I love like the whole like the mindset workshop and everything. It's all about helping other people achieve that positive mindset so that they can give to other people as well.
And I think there's a balance between truth and a balance between
Like a white lie.
yeah, like
Yeah.
of making you feel better about yourself. So like when it comes down to like complimenting and like complimenting yourself. So like let's say you are like hypothetically fat, even though like society like there's that's a very like big, let's just say hypothetically you are fat and or let's just say overweight. And when it comes down to that, it's important to realize that yes, okay, this might be there might be some level of truth to that, and not living in delusion and thinking that hey, you're skinny. So there's a balance of like knowing that truth, but it's it's another thing to you don't necessarily have to feel bad about it. It's not something that's saying, "Oh, I'm fat, therefore no one will love me, therefore I cannot love myself." It's I'm fat, cool, I still love myself for who I am. I still want to work toward getting skinnier, but even though I love myself for who I am. So, it's like it's knowing the truth of who you are and
Mhm.
having that balance of not having it like connect you know how there's the we talked about the condition of happiness, like saying the prerequisites of happiness. There's no prerequisites of loving yourself. We build
Mhm.
this like notion of like once I'm skinny, once I have money, once I have a house, then I'll be happy. Then I'll love myself. Then people will love me for who I am. But you're giving a prerequisite for loving yourself. You're saying, "Oh, once I get that, then I can love myself for who I am."
Mhm.
But it's like that never comes because you're always chasing the next thing to find out to actually love yourself, but you need to really like dive into who you are and say, "Hey, I love myself for who I am right now." And most people can't say that. Like 90, I would say like 90%
Yeah.
can't say that about themselves or will even do that their entire life. And to think about that is crazy. Like they will live their whole life and not tell themselves they love themselves one time. And
Yeah.
it just blows my mind. It really
Yeah.
does.
It is. It's really sad because it goes back to like the brain and the mindset and how we have been essentially conditioned from a young age. It's like with me in general, my parents, you had to be doctor, engineer. And so that's the only way to like make your parents proud. It's like there's no other specialty that will make you
Yeah.
proud. So I guess I have to go down that route to just obtain your love. But you have to, as an adult and as, people who like, you know, have been going through problems in life and anything, you just have to accept where you are, understand and acknowledge where you are in your condition in any situation, but still know that you are more than worth. You're lovable, and your love is enough for yourself. And a lot of people, even with relationships, I was having this conversation with a very close friend where a lot of relationships they end really bad because they put their expectations of love for their partner when really they should be put loving themselves first, and that person's other love is just extra. So you shouldn't like put an expectation on someone, and you're bound to get disappointed. And so always have, like, again, fill your own cup, and then when you can fill your own cup, you can go and fill other people's cups. And um, but I totally agree with you. You can't just say, like, if you're chubby, you can't be like delusional and be like, I am so skinny, and like,
Yeah.
you know. But you have
Yeah.
to be honest with yourself, but know that why is it that you want to be skinny? Like, what's the reason why? You have to know, like, do you think that being skinny is going to make you lovable? It's going to make you happy? Because if that's the case, it's not true. Seriously, it's not. Like, I'm skinny. Okay, I think I go to the gym like, oh, I wish I could have like more weight and gain weight, and I struggle with that. But I tell myself, I know what I want to go and I know what I want. But right now, wherever I am in my condition that I am currently, I love myself and I am enough. When you tell yourself that, it's gonna be hard at first. It's gonna be really hard to believe it. But with time, you're gonna be like, okay, then now how do I get to point A to point B after acknowledging that I can be happy now? And once you obtain what you want, you realize like, wow, it wasn't really all that. And I'm so happy I realized early on that I can be happy prior to this. And your love for yourself would even increase even more. And that goes on to living a very happy, fulfilled life because you, again, you know who you are, you know where your challenges were, and you're able to really look at yourself in the mirror and be like, hey, I didn't fail you, the person looking back at me, and That's the best feeling. And I hope everyone in the world can like experience that. I'm
And
still a work in progress.
yeah, and I think there's power in loving the worst version and the most shameful version of yourself, because we're always running away from that shameful version of ourselves of being fat. For me, like a person doing drugs, like all these other things, and we're running away from that shameful version of ourselves. Saying like, "Oh, if I become that, someone won't love me." But if you learn to love that version of yourself, even the most shameful version of yourself, then you can realize that you can love any part of yourself, really, because we're always running saying, "Oh, if I become that, I won't love myself, or someone won't love me." And if you give love to that version of yourself that you built of that shameful version, then you'll start to love all the different parts of you, even the ugly parts. It's all great to like live up in your ego and say, "Oh, I always love me," like everything else. But
Yeah.
if you only love the best version of yourself, if anything happens to you, you become fragile. If someone says, for example, if you don't have your makeup on, or if you mess up your
Yeah.
haircut, like whatever may happen, then all of a sudden your world shatters. And that's where if you love the worst version of yourself, you don't care if that happens. You're like, hey, like no matter whatever goes on, you love that worst version of yourself. Which is not easy. It's not easy to love that most shameful version of yourself, because we've been trained like through society. So like for example, like to not be fat. Let's just use that one. If we're fat, like it's saying, hey, we're gonna be made fun of. Therefore, someone won't love me. Therefore, I can't love myself. And we kind
Mhm.
of build that as we grow up. And it's a very difficult thing to go through and say, hey, even if I am fat, I will still love myself. I will still love my body image. Do I need to work on it? Yes, but I will still love myself regardless. And that's not an easy thing to say. It's not, but it's important to love yourself, even the worst version of yourself.
Yeah. It goes to don't put your value on an external thing because once you put your value and you attach it to it, if that thing goes, so does your identity and your own value. So like let's say for a car, like people again, it goes out, you want to be a millionaire so you can drive those beautiful like cars like a Lamborghini, but if your identity is placed into that car and it gets wrecked, there goes your confidence. So it's always best to again have a solid foundation with yourself, be content with where you are currently, and acknowledge that you have so much more potential to grow. And with this mind of ours, we only know, like, please don't quote me, but from what I've heard is we only know like 5% of the brain. We don't know, we don't use 100% of our brain. Like we only use a certain small percentage, and it's like 5%. And our potential is insane. Like as humans, if you focus on the mind and know that you're limitless, and it's not like a L'Oreal commercial, but it's true. You are, yeah, you are worth it, and know your value, and you are 1,000,000% lovable. And the love should always start with yourself first, and then anyone else's love is just extra. So
Yeah. I
I agree.
think I think the relationship with ourselves is like the biggest thing that no one talks about. Where everyone talks about the relationship they have with other people, and how to increase that, but very few people talk about that relationship with themselves, because we don't perceive reality as it is. Is we build like this social reality inside of us. That's why humans were able to dominate the earth. Um, and it's really important we construct our social reality that happens inside of us. So if I walk into a room full of 100 people and I think they all hate me, that means that's my social reality. Like I'm building a social reality inside of me and saying, oh, they all hate me. But if I walk into a room of 100 people and then I say, oh, they all love me, that's the social reality I'm building. But we construct that. Our brain has been designed over time to think the way it has currently, but we have the tools to change those ways. But we first have to become aware of those things. So when you walk into a room, just ask your brain, saying, "Hey, what do all these people think of me?" And if they say, "Oh, they're looking at my haircut. Oh, they think I'm fat or whatever it may be," it's like, okay, those are the insecurities you have. Most likely, they're not thinking about any of those
Yeah.
things. So it's like this reality we construct that is just so like usually far away from what's actually happening. It's insane.
Yeah. It's funny because you mentioned this, but my sister, my oldest sister, she's my whole family, my uncles, like cousins are like, she's so beautiful. Like she was known in our family still today. Like she's like the most beautifulest one. And when she was young, she said she thought she was ugly. She literally thought that she was so ugly and she didn't like how she looked. And then she was like, now that she has 5 children and she's like 40 something, and she's like, oh my God, I was so stupid. I look at my younger pictures and I was gorgeous and I didn't know my value. And I was like, girl, if only you knew back then, you would have enjoyed your life. But I was like, I didn't want to like put salt in her wound. I'm like, it's okay. It's fine. We've all gone through that point in our lives where we didn't like how we look in a certain picture. But it shows, it goes to show that you have to just love yourself. And one day, I think the best thing to actually understand too is we're all going to be dead. You know, a lot of people don't like talking about death. We're not going to be taking worldly possessions in a grave with us. Maybe, yeah, you might be lucky and take a coffin with you and preserve yourself like a mummy. But other than that, you won't be taking your Rolls Royce, or you won't be taking your house, or your, you know, anything else. You'll be taking just yourself. And you should know that if you're just taking yourself in a grave and you're going to be 6 feet under, you should be enough in this world that you're currently alive and you're breathing. Life is insane how blessed we are to be in this world. We're breathing. We're all, I wish, you know, the health that we all have, you know, what we've gone through during the pandemic. It's crazy, the deaths that's happened. And we have to understand that I can shift my mind from thinking of stupid things that don't really matter, as sad as it is, but it's like life is so much more than you being worried about my looks and how I, you know, how I feel and everything. You just have to tell yourself there's so much more to life than what I'm currently trying to make myself experience. And so when you think about it in that way, in that mindset, you start realizing like, okay, I can do so much with my life. And life is all about experiences. Like go travel the world if anyone can financially go. You went to Australia. I was so like happy for you. So
Thank you.
bro, I was like, go, Victor. But I was like, as humans, we need to like see the world and understand that, you know, you're so much more. You're everyone in this who's watching. You're so valuable. I say this to my brothers, my family. You don't know how valuable you are. Like you are a walking $1 million already. Like your kidney is worth 1 million. I had a professor who he asked us in the beginning of the lecture. He was like, "Who here would donate their kidney for $1 million?" Everyone rose their hand. And then he's like, "Do you know what your kidney does for you?" And then after he gave us a whole lecture of what the benefits of like what your poor kidneys do for you on a daily basis, everyone, not a single person raised their hand. And each of your kidney on the black market, horrible to even mention it, but it's worth millions, and you are worth millions. No one can make you. There's no one in the world like you. So that should be enough to know that you're so valuable and you're 1 million% lovable. And to go back heart and mind aligned, when you love yourself within your own heart, you know, we associate love by the symbol of a heart. And so when you can love yourself with that heart that, you know, God gave you, whether you believe in God or not, it ties into your mind. And another point is your heart is like another brain as well. Your brain is kind of in its genius and knowledge and how smart it is. It's low key stupid because it doesn't really know what's good for it. That's why we try to protect ourselves. We're comfortable in our comfort zone, and growth really happens when we step outside our comfort zone. But your brain doesn't know that, so it's in the fight or flight mode all the time. When you like want to talk to a stranger or you want to do something different, your brain's like, whoa, 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 what are you doing? Like pump on the brakes. And your
Yeah.
heart, that's why people like follow your heart, because there's no breaks in that. Your heart will guide you. And so when you love yourself, you have more control of that steering wheel to take control of your life. But if you're not even in like love with yourself and not in like an egotistical way and like in a content way, you would achieve so much more in your life and create lasting impact. And again, not only help your own self, your family, your friends, but that of the whole world.
Yeah, I totally agree. And unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. Khalil, please tell the audience
Darn
how to
it.
find you and how to find if they ever want to get in contact with you.
Yeah, so if you guys ever want to like reach out, currently on Instagram. It's Khalil dot Husseini. Actually, I'm so sorry. It's actually Khalil dot official, and then there's a line underneath that. It's attached to the description or something. But yeah, if you guys ever want to reach out, definitely reach out. I'd be so happy to like connect with you guys. But it's
Cool,
been true.
awesome. Yeah. Thank you everyone for watching. And Khalil, thank you so much for joining. That's all we have time for today. This is the Mind Workshop podcast. We'll catch